Welcome back to Tune Into Nature. My name is Anna, your host for Season 6. In this episode, I have another one of my fellow student ambassadors, Maddy, joining me as a co-host here today because in this episode, we're talking about some pretty spooky stuff and I might need a hand to hold. Who knows? Maddy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Maddy. I will be your co-host for this episode. I use she, her pronouns. I am a double major here at Warner College studying Forest and Rangeland Stewardship with a concentration in forest fire science and natural resource management. And I'm originally from Bettendorf, Iowa.
With it being my favorite month of October, which houses my favorite holiday, welcome to our Halloween-themed episode. From creepy crawly bark beetles to zombie forest, this isn't a normal walk in the woods, but an informative trot through a haunted forest. Today we have the horrifyingly amazing opportunity to speak with the director of the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, or CFRI, Tony Cheng.
Tony is a professor in the Department of Forest and Rangeland Stewardship and is the director of the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute at Colorado State University. Tony's primary research interests are in forest governance, policy, and administration, with a focus on collaborative approaches to promote resilient social ecological systems linked to forest landscapes. In his capacity as director of CFRI, Tony oversees programs to develop, compile, and apply current knowledge through collaborative, adaptive management approaches to achieve forest restoration and wildfire hazard reduction goals.
With that, Tony, would you like to introduce yourself?
Great. My name is Tony Cheng, he, him pronouns. I'm originally from Washington State, and I started here at Colorado State University back in January of 2000, and I've seen some frightening things happen to our forests since then. So this is a really wonderful thing.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us here today. To jump into the questions, can you briefly introduce yourself and your role as the director of the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll talk a little bit about CFRI first. CFRI is a congressionally authorized program that was created in 2005, and that was at a time when, especially in the Southwest, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, these areas experienced some very large, severe wildfires. A lot larger than and more severe than people had experienced and what a lot of the science record has shown. And that kind of freaked people out, right? And so Congress was eager to try to jump in and provide some solutions. And one of the solutions was, or one of the problems that was being confronted was that a lot of the forest managers and fire managers were having a hard time like keeping up with a lot of the science around some of these big fires at the time, kind of the intersection of climate change, some of these forest health issues that I think we'll be talking about. And so they needed an entity to be able to compile and synthesize that science and make it usable and meaningful to managers in a much more efficient way. So we kind of help do that translation. We help do a lot of that streamlining, which means that I direct a team of full-time people. We also have a lot of students that we hire to collect a lot of science information and make it translatable and usable for a lot of our manager partners throughout Colorado and the Intermountain West.
Thanks. So I'll do a lot of really, really neat work.
Yeah. Forests play a vital role in our ecosystem. So what kind of motivated you to pursue a career in studying and restoring forest landscapes?
Yeah, well, I have originally an undergraduate degree in political science from a small liberal arts college in Washington State. Got really interested in just kind of reading about and thinking about policy and political systems and how people make decisions, how people try to work through conflict to reach some kind of common good. I also grew up doing a lot of camping and fishing and doing a lot of outdoor stuff in Washington, Idaho, Oregon, Montana. So when it kind of came time after I finished my degree and I was kind of wandering around in that kind of post-graduation wilderness, kind of really asked myself what really gives me joy and passion, what's something that I really wanted to do. And a lot of it kind of brought me back to those early childhood and growing up in forested areas. And once I started looking around to both either jobs and graduate school, found out that there's actually a degree in forestry, which kind of is interesting because we're in a forestry program. I'm in a forestry program right now. So that really drew my interest in pursuing a master's degree in forestry, but combining the political science and the policy side. And so that was a really great gateway. But certainly it's always been it was important for me to do something that had a legacy and to be a part of something bigger than just kind of just doing a job and then going home and having, kind of random hobbies, kind of having a real passion towards conservation and doing something that leaves something for future generations, which natural resources and forestry allows me to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really similar passion, or similar thing that a lot of Warner Rams have here, is that like goal and passion to create a legacy that you were saying that affects others just than themselves and creates a more positive impact. Yeah.
That's definitely something that drove me into the field of forestry. So.
And that's what's great about this community, right, in Warner, is that it's a really self-selecting group of students, faculty, and staff, because we're all kind of drawn around a kind of a similar passion and interest. Because otherwise, more than just making money and that kind of stuff, it's really, doing something good for the planet.
Well said. All right. Getting into the disturbances that we will be talking about today, let's start with bark beetles. Can you explain the symbiotic relationship between bark beetles and the fungus they carry, and then kind of going into how the fungus aids in the decomposition of the trees and the development of new beetle generations?
Yeah, so now we're getting to really spooky stuff, right? The sciencey spooky, the science of spookiness. So, yeah, so bark beetles, there's many bark beetles in the world, and here in Colorado and a lot of western forests, they're native. They've co-evolved with our forests over tens of millions of years. So I think that's one important thing for listeners to know, is that these beetles are important to the ecosystem. They've also then co-evolved with other pathogens that, when combined, it creates a mortality agent that kills trees. And so these fungus are kind of, they're co-evolved, and they enter the trees as these bark beetles bore into the bark, and they're just part of their bodies. But then once they get into the bark, the beetles are feeding off the sugars. They lay their eggs, and their eggs also feed off the sugars of the trees, so that they grow and then become adults. But then the fungus actually creates what's called a blue stain that also then infects the wood, that also then cuts off the flows of sugar and other nutrients into the tree, and that's also a primary agent in what kills the tree, is that it just stops that flow of nutrients that goes up and feeds the tree. So when you have that, both the combination of the beetles, first of all, attacking the tree, infesting it with and laying their own eggs, and then bringing in this fungus, that's kind of a double whammy that a lot of trees then can't survive. And then once the beetles hatch, the larvae hatch into adults, they fly out, and then they infect more trees, and then they also carry that fungus into the bark.
These bark beetles have obviously been like a significant concern in all of our forests, especially across the western U.S. But can you explain just kind of the ecological implications that they're having and like the role that fire is playing in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, these beetles are natural, right? They're native to these ecosystems and to these forests. And so there's always been a background rate of trees that get infected. They usually are are trees that are older, or they are grown in more kind of crowded conditions where they have to compete for nutrients and water and light. And so anytime you get in a prolonged drought in particular, then that stresses those trees and then makes them more vulnerable to a beetle infestation. And so you always kind of have that moving around the landscape. One of the things that's been different about the recent bark beetles, that we have the mountain pine beetle and the spruce bark beetle. And the mountain pine beetle infects primarily lodgepole pine and ponderosa pine, kind of the needles pines. And then the spruce bark beetle obviously infects the spruces, especially Engelmann spruce. Is that they are the area of land, the area of forest that has been infested by these bugs are much larger. They're huge. And so the mountain pine beetle, for example, is part of an outbreak that extended from Colorado all the way into British Columbia. So something like 40 million acres of forest land across the Rocky Mountain spine all the way up into Canada were infected at the same time. That's pretty phenomenal. That's kind of unusual, and that's now we understand from a science perspective, there's a larger climate change signal, right? Warmer temperatures, especially in the winter, allows more drought conditions to persist, and it creates much more stressed conditions. We also have a lot of forests that are in the same age class, right? About 120, 150, 200 years old. That's probably a signal from the Euro-American settler colonization of this landscape from about the mid 1800s into the present. That resulted in a lot of clear cutting for mining, agriculture, railroads, those kinds of things. And so all those forests grew up around the same time. So you kind of have both anthropogenic and kind of natural forces coming together to create a pretty continent-wide ecological disturbance and change. Then you combine that with persistent drought, warming temperatures, more people on the landscape means there's more ignition sources, right? Campfires, sparks, cigarette butts, you name it, whatever can start a fire will happen. And then you have all these forests that have been dried out. They're much more available to burn. So if you think about throwing like a green branch on a campfire versus a branch that's been dead for 3 or 4 years, that dead branch is going to catch fire a lot quicker in general. And so you just kind of have this interplay between kind of having more fuel available for a fire to spread and kind of grow. And we're seeing that in a lot of places in the West as well.
That's a lot to wrap your head around.
There's a lot of
combining factors, like you said. So, finding a solution seems a little bit complicated, but kind of moves me to my next question. Are there any strategies being employed to manage the bark beetle's impact on Colorado forests, such as like preemptive management?
Yeah, the conditions that give rise to beetle outbreaks occur over decades, right? Like, as I mentioned, the outbreaks typically infest older trees, 120, 150, 200 years old. They typically then occur in more dense forests that when they experience drought become more stressed. One solution to get ahead is to kind of look at areas in your landscape that might be in a condition that might be more susceptible, and maybe do some proactive thinning or some patch cutting to kind of clear out and create some new growth. So that's one option. But once you get an epidemic, like when the population really explodes, there's really not much to be done. One of the things that we're finding out afterwards, when we do have these zombie forests, right, that have been killed, is that you still have cones. pine cones or spruce cones that still have seed, but the question becomes, how long are those seeds viable for, when they drop on the ground to sprout new trees? Lodgepole forests, as many of us in Warner know, generally need fire to open up the cones. A lot of them are serotinous cones. So we're starting to see fires interact with these beetle-killed forests, but because these forests have been dead for about 15 years, we don't know how viable those seeds are. So they might open up and those seeds might not be viable, or the cones may be so dry that those cones burn up and they kill all the seeds. So one of the preemptive things to look at, it's preemptive in the sense that we're trying to figure out, after the beetle kill and after a fire, can we look at areas that we might need to replant? Because we're not going to have that seed source left, right? The fire burned too hot, or we're lacking a seed. So we can do some advanced analysis to look at areas that might be more susceptible to forest loss, that might not have that seed, and get ahead of it to think about where we want to plant. Maybe we might even think about what kinds of species we want to plant for more of a climate adaptive future.
Kind of touched on that like zombie forest thing, and kind of how bark beetles are playing such a pivotal role in kind of where forests are going. Can you just explain that term of zombie forests and like the context in forest ecology? And then how do forests transition into this state of zombie forest?
So I think zombie forest may be one of those anthropomorphizations of nature that might not necessarily translate. One of the important roles of these beetles is that it creates room for the new generation of forests to grow. Right? So you kind of have to have the older mature trees eventually die in order to create the space and the seedbed, the little seedbed for the new forest to regenerate. So it's part of the cycle, right? And so we as humans might be disturbed by the fact that there's like these kind of gray ghosts out there of former living forests. But if you actually look, if you take your gaze from the gray standing dead forest and you look down a little bit lower, we oftentimes see a lot of green new forest coming back. And so in some ways, those zombies are kind of birth mothers for the new generation of forests, and that kind of needs to happen. So maybe we can think about these zombies as more helpful, the helpful ghosts, rather than the harmful ghosts.
Yeah, kind of, circle of life, everything has an end and a beginning, and so, kind of shifting that view. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and the same thing with fire as well, right? A lot of these forests do need fire. It can be really scary for us. We kind of think about, maybe we've been enculturated by the Bambi movie that had the fire raging through the forest and all the animals running out. But in fact, those animals, sometimes they can come back to even a more vibrant forest, after it regenerates. So, we can think about these things in different ways, and I think that's what we teach at Warner, is to look at these processes through a more science perspective and give us a different appreciation of what that cycle of nature really looks like.
For sure, yeah.
What are key signs or indicators that a forest has become a zombie forest? And are there specific tree species or regions that are more susceptible to this phenomenon?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a lot of, because of climate change, we're seeing a lot of forests experience different kind of stress. So one example is in some of the highest elevation where we see like species like bristlecone pine. Bristlecone pine are among some of the oldest living tree species. I think some of the oldest bristlecone pines on record in the Sierra Nevadas in California are like 4,000 years old. here in Colorado, we have bristlecone pines that are like 2,600 years old. So like wrap your head around that, right? It's really phenomenal how long-lived these trees can be, and yet a lot of these trees are dying out because of climate change. And so I think those are, at the highest elevations, those are trees that are really vulnerable and susceptible to being those zombies. We're seeing mountain pine beetle actually infect these forests, and that's kind of unusual. We haven't seen that in kind of our ecological textbooks, and now we're seeing, kind of these forests being susceptible. So we know that there's something going on. And so I think every major forest type and tree species has a vulnerability, especially as a result of kind of these climate signals, creating that stress. So one of the things that we think about in the department and certainly at CFRI is, okay, if there's going to be some vulnerabilities and these tree species aren't resilient to future climate change, can we get ahead of it? Can we think about more adaptive strategies, like planting trees that may be more adapted, more suitable for drier, warmer conditions, and start interplanting them as we do our management activities. We can think about doing more, especially in our drier forests, do more, thinning out and prescribed burning so that they become more resilient to future fires. So there's a lot of proactive ways in which we can keep forests growing and green, but we also continue to have to monitor which of those might end up being those living zombies, but not lose all hope that we can also get ahead of the game. We have a lot of strategies that we can employ ahead of time in kind of knowing where these might occur.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of technological advances have really facilitated a kind of a better way of dealing with these forests, which is as society just progresses, I feel like there's hope to be positive that even more technology will advance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the kinds of technologies that we teach in classes here at Warner, like GIS and using more of those kind of spatial informatics to determine where are areas that we can model that might be experiencing warmer and drier. We also know that there's probably areas that are going to be also maybe a little cooler and wetter. And using those tools, students can forecast where places may be more vulnerable and susceptible to being zombies and where we might be okay. And so that also helps us make economical decisions about if we have limited resources, it might be better to put our money over here than over here, and we can use science and technology to help make those proactive decisions.
Yeah, totally. So we've kind of touched on how these zombie forests have come to be, and we're definitely getting to that point where it's okay, now what do we need to do to actually kind of handle the situation, however that may be. But what do you think steps could be for individuals, communities, and policymakers to contribute to this conservation effort of forests and aiding in their restoration?
Yeah, well, there's so many things that just kind of regular people in their everyday lives and choices can make. I think I work a lot in forest fire, and one of the oldest messages that Smokey Bear gave us is don't be the person that starts a forest fire by leaving a campfire unattended. Those are still really important, simple messages for all of us to take into account. And there's just about 80%, at least 80% of all forest fires are ignited by humans. So think about that, right? Yeah. If you can cut that even in half, you have allowed a lot of these forests. You can save a lot of the existing forest or mitigate a lot of that risk to the existing forest. Another thing is just to listen to podcasts like this and become educated in what's going on. There you go, right? And becoming educated in what's going on, right? There's so much information out there, and sometimes there's a lot of confusing information. And so, I think looking for reliable sources, I would like to think that universities are very well trusted still as sources of information, and looking for resources about what's going on in our forest. Should I be worried? What are our managers doing? Get educated in terms of what managers are thinking about on a lot of our public forests. There's opportunities for the general public and just community members to get engaged in what like the U.S. Forest Service is planning and get involved in their planning and decision-making processes. They provide a lot of great resources too. And so a lot of it starts with education and awareness. And then I think there's also a role for all of us to limit our contributions to climate change in terms of, our own consumer choices, in terms of, ways that we can make choices that limit our carbon emissions and be more sustainable. One of the things that we don't often talk about, but it's certainly a campaign here in Colorado, is we have a lot of choices of where to buy, like our forest products, paper or wood and those kinds of things. And there's still, those wood products that are produced right here in Colorado, and that supports local Colorado businesses. That in turn goes back to being able to invest in forest management. So that's another easy consumer choice that we can make every day, and kind of reading labels. Where is this made? I'm supporting a Colorado business that goes back into supporting Colorado forest management.
Yeah. That's a really good example. Yeah, and then just, expanding your awareness, I think, is totally one of the most important things of just knowing what's going on, because if you don't know what's going on, you can't do anything.
I know, and then you get spooked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jump scared, even. Yeah. All right. Lastly, for our listeners who might be inspired to get involved, what advice would you give individuals interested in pursuing a career in forest conservation and restoration, and what steps can they take to make a meaningful impact in the field?
Yeah. Well, like I described in my introduction, I didn't even know there was a professional field of forestry. And so I think that, again, is a really good start, is to, especially for maybe kids that might be interested in, thinking about a major, but just even the general public, is knowing that there is a profession and getting to know those folks. There's the Colorado State Forest Service. They're an arm here. They're a program of Warner College. Their job is to provide service and education and outreach to the citizens of Colorado in all matters of forestry. So they have great resources. Get to know your local forester, the Colorado State Forest Service. Same with the U.S. Forest Service. Your taxpayer dollars goes to paying them to produce education and outreach programs and resources. There's a lot of volunteer activities right now, especially after a lot of these big fires. There's a lot of tree planting activities. There's a lot of need for that. And so just getting involved, getting your coworkers, your friends and neighbors to sign up for one of these volunteer activities. Just here in northern Colorado, around Fort Collins, we have numerous nonprofit organizations like the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. I know that they just had a big tree planting volunteer weekend. They just planted like over 550 trees up the Poudre River Canyon with one of the local businesses here in town. So I think there's so many opportunities for folks to get involved. Another thing that also occurs is that there are ways in which different public and private organizations are conserving forest land through conservation easements or purchasing land for conservation. Those are great causes to support if you're interested in conservation of these kind of rare and especially lands that are kind of vulnerable to development. So once you build a house and streets and all that stuff, you kind of lose the forest forever. So sometimes the best thing we can do is to just keep forest as forest. Yeah.
All right, well, that kind of wraps up our general questions that we have for you today, but we do have some rapid fire / fun questions that we
Okay.
include, so get ready.
Okay.
Favorite forest?
Western larch.
Oh, wait. Favorite forest type?
Western larch.
Okay. Favorite forest?
Oh, favorite forest. Like an actual place?
Yes, like destination-wise that you like to go.
The Jedediah State Park, Redwood Forest in Jedediah State Park in Northern California.
Yeah, I would bet. Yeah.
No, those California redwoods are like my absolute favorite.
They are.
But what is your favorite tree?
My favorite tree, I would have to say Western larch.
I did not see that one coming.
The reason for that is it is the only deciduous conifer tree, right? Turns a beautiful bright yellow, and they're also, at least here in the lower 48, they're only found in northern Idaho and northwestern Montana. So you go into some of these landscapes, and when you see the Western larch turn during the fall, it's like these bright, it's like aspen here, right? They just light up the hillside with this bright yellow against this kind of, backdrop of green, and it's just fabulous.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good choice. Yeah.
Adding that one to my bucket list.
Yes.
We'll be going up there.
Yeah.
Do you have a Halloween costume picked out yet for spooky season?
I have a couple that I are kind of my go-tos. So that'll have to be a surprise. You have to come and trick or treat at my house to actually see what it is.
Can you give us a hint?
It has to do with during the Middle Ages, there were people that walked around picking up the dead, and I forgot what they were called, but they have a special mask that has a beak on it. And
Plague doctor?
Plague doctors.
Thank you.
And so I have a plague doctor outfit
Okay.
that I've acquired from my son. He had the original plague doctor, but it's such a cool costume because when you open up the door for trick-or-treaters, right, you have this black hat with this really freaky looking mask and just like this black cape.
Yeah.
And it's pretty intimidating, I must say.
For a little kid too.
Yeah. But all they're looking at is the bright, shiny candy in the bowl. But it's kind of fun.
You gotta make them work for it.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. When you said that, the grave people are like the body people that come around. You made me think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh yeah.
I was about to say I watched that this weekend.
Yeah.
Bring out your dead.
Exactly. I was like, that's niche.
That's very niche. Yeah. So the plague doctor is one of my go-tos, and then I have other just kind of goofy outfits, kind of recycled from the New Belgium's Tour de Fat. So I have kind of boas and funky glasses and stuff. So it could be a fun kind of goofy thing or the plague doctor. I haven't decided what the mood is.
We'll get there when we get there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Last one. Favorite Halloween candy?
Kit Kat.
Good choice. Good choice.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to thank Mr. Tony Cheng so much for joining us here today. Your insight was absolutely amazing. No other person could have answered this spooky episode like you did.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to sit in on the podcast.
Of course. That's all we have for this episode of Tune Into Nature. Tune in next time for our next episode that I'll leave on a cliffhanger.
We'll see you next time
On Tune Into Nature. Good job.